Okay, this is the audio script for group number 5 in the AM, who is doing a group presentation about Prohibition. And this is from episode 8, Boom, of the History Channel TV series America, the Story of Us. And this group will be presenting on Tuesday, March 8th, 2016. The introduction is going to be by Melina. Hello everyone, I'm Melina, and we're group 5 of episode 8. And our topic is Prohibition. This is Dina, Joey, Carolina, Jin, and me, Melina. In our presentation, we'll have 4 parts. I'm going to talk about the U.S. Constitution and the 18th and 21st Amendments. Dina is going to talk about the reason that alcohol was made illegal. Jin is going to talk about corruption, organized crime, Al Capone, and tax evasion. Joey is going to talk about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. And finally, Carolina is going to make the conclusion. Prohibition is an historic period in the United States that started in 1918. In 1919, Congress passed the National Prohibition Act. The Act established the legal definition of intoxicating liquors, as well as penalties for producing them, and prohibited the sale of alcohol. And now Dina will talk about why alcohol became illegal. Key ideas, the reason that alcohol was made illegal. Thank you, Melina. Hi, I'm Dina. I'm going to speak about the causes of Prohibition. Prohibition was a period of nearly 14 years of U.S. history, from 1920 to 1933, in which the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol was illegal. It was a time characterized by speakeasies, glamour, and gangsters. Prohibition was sometimes referred to as the noble experiment and led to the first and only U.S. amendment to the United States Constitution, which was later repealed. Let's change this to past tense. Led to the first and only amendment to the United States Constitution, which was later repealed. After the American Revolution, drinking was on the rise. In the 19th century, to combat this, a number of groups or societies were organized In the 19th century, to combat this, a number of groups or societies were organized as part of a new temperance movement. This movement blamed alcohol for many of the ills of society, especially crime and murder. The temperance movement considered saloons to be places of evil, and prohibition would hopefully stop drunk husbands from beating their wives and children. The temperance movement considered saloons to be places of evil, and prohibition would hopefully stop drunk husbands from beating their wives and children, spending all the family income on alcohol, and prevent accidents in the workplace caused by workers who drank during lunch. Now, Melina will speak about the passage of the 18th Amendment. Key ideas, Constitution, Amendment. Thank you, Dina. I'm going to talk about the United States Constitution and the 18th and 21st Amendments. Passage of the Prohibition Amendment. In 1917, After the United States entered World War I, President Wilson instituted a temporary wartime prohibition in order to save grain for producing food. That same year, Congress created the 18th Amendment, which banned the making, selling, or transporting of alcoholic beverages in the United States. Despite very early signs of success, including a decline in arrests for drunkenness and a reported 30% drop in alcohol consumption, those who wanted to keep drinking found ever more inventive ways to do it. Ever more inventive ways to do it. The illegal manufacturing and sale of liquor, known as bootlegging, went on during the decade, along with the operation of speakeasies, stores or nightclubs selling alcohol. It was also easy to smuggle alcohol across the border from Canada and the Caribbean, and the informal production of liquor moonshine in private homes was common. Every large town had its speakeasies or illegal taverns that served liquor, the end of Prohibition. By 1932, in now the third year of the Great Depression, creating jobs and revenue by legalizing the liquor industry became essential. In addition, the Prohibition era encouraged the rise of criminal activity associated with bootlegging. The money to be made through bootlegging encouraged the growth of organized crime. By the end of the decade, it was clear that Prohibition had failed. Many people called for the repeal of the 18th Amendment. On February 13, 1932, Congress approved the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition. And now, Kyungjin will continue with the Mafia and money. Keywords: corruption, organized crime, Al Capone, tax evasion. Hi, I'm Jin. Nobody was punished among all of the assailants. Nobody was punished among all of the assailants that exploded 157 bombs in Chicago from October 1927 to January 1929. New York was worse. How was this possible? The reason was the whole world, especially almost all office holders, were corrupt. First of all, many public officials were on the take habitually. Many gangsters started to join in organized criminal activities across the United States in the 1920s. Typically, they were located in New York, Kansas, LA, Detroit, Philadelphia, Boston, and Chicago. And selling illegal alcohol was very profitable for them. Al Capone, who was the most notorious gangster, earned $100 a minute from bootlegging. That is $1,500 a minute today. Even though he killed a lot of people in various ways, he was not in jail. But Frank Wilson, who was an accountant for the government, found his tax evasion between 1925 and 1929 Okay, where were we? We're here. But Frank Wilson, who was an accountant for the government, found is strange. It's basically the same, but discovered is better. And his is Capone, so we mean Capone, not Wilson. So once again, but Frank Wilson, who was an accountant for the government, discovered Capone's tax evasion between 1925 and 1929, and finally Al Capone, was arrested in 1931. But Frank Wilson, who was an accountant for the government, discovered Capone's tax evasion between 1925 and 1929, and finally, Al Capone was arrested in 1931. Tax is an important thing to manage the government budget, and the collection, or lack of it, can be a tool to catch criminals. Now Joey is going to explain about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Thank you. Joey, key ideas. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Hi, I'm Joey. I will talk about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Jin already mentioned Al Capone, who was the most notorious gangster of all in Chicago. One of Capone's longtime enemies, the Irish gangster George Bugs Moran, ran his bootlegging operations out of a garage on the north side of Chicago. February 14, 1929. Two of the men, who were in police uniforms, and the other three in ordinary civilian clothes, entered gangster Bugs Moran's headquarters. Then they lined up 7 of Moran's henchmen against a wall and shot them to death. 6 dead men and another who was dying. Okay, so 6 dead men. 6 dead men and another who was dying were lying on the concrete floor. The dying gangster Moran was taken to the hospital. When the police asked who shot him, he answered, "Nobody shot me." He died a few hours later, still refusing to say what had happened and who had done it. It's the most notorious slaying in mob history. Who was behind the hit? The police or Al Capone? The forensic weapons expert established that just 2 Tommy guns were fired. Neither was a police gun. Everything pointed to Capone, but he had an alibi. He was in Florida at the time. The police would have to get him on a different charge. Jin told us earlier that he was in fact arrested because of income tax evasion. Next, Carolina will make a conclusion for our group presentation. Hi, this is Carolina. Or, hi, I'm Carolina. I'm going to conclude our project about prohibition. The prohibition of alcohol was probably a useless law at the time because it led to the opposite. People increased the consumption of alcohol, and this resulted in many deaths, assaults, the creation of the U.S. Mafia, insecurity, and violence. Also, many politicians and other officials in all positions became corrupt and criminals. Those criminal organizations got rich through that decade, and it is evident that this prohibition did more harm than good. For my entire group, I would like to thank you for your attention. And we hope that you now have learned something and know something more about what prohibition was and why it happened in the United States.